Thank you and welcome to the Patriots 300 Level Podcast. My name is Eric. I'm joined by my co-host Kevin. Today we're going to be discussing pretty much the breaking news that came out this morning that Bill Belichick has gone in New England, and just talking about potentially the fallout, what our thoughts are, and what's going for how the Patriots go forward. As a reminder, you can follow us on Twitter/X and Instagram at Pats 300 Level Pod for up-to-the-minute updates and commentary on news of the day, as well as at our website at pats300levelpod.com. So, Kevin, I woke up this morning at 5 a.m. to a text from you. I'm on the West Coast, for those of you that aren't familiar with me. And pretty much every single day this week, starting Monday, my body has just anxiously been waking up around 4 or 5 in the morning, trying to see if I got a text from Kevin with the news of anything that's happened with Bill. And I had a feeling if it was going to happen in the morning, it might happen early. I know when Tom left, the news came out. I believe it was at like 7:20 in the morning, something like that, that he posted. So I thought there might be a chance to come out in the morning. And so I just saw one word text from Kevin, and I knew what that meant. So I was very disappointed to see that. I know that for those of you who follow us, if you haven't, both me and Kevin have been both on keeping Bill train. So I was disappointed. So what was your initial thoughts when you saw the news? I'm not sure if you saw it on Twitter or you got the text when you refreshed it. I wasn't sure how you actually found it. I just found out because I saw one word text from you.
Yeah, so I had woke up at 7:30. That's when my alarm went off, and I was in a daze, and so I was getting ready to go downstairs because I had to go out to the store real quick to get cream cheese, and I look at a text from one of our other brothers that said, told you they weren't keeping Bill, and it was kind of a joke because all along he's been kind of with us that Bill was going to stay, so just kind of like still saying he's right even though he's not. And I was like, oh fuck. Like so then I ended
And
up
that was the
checking
text
Twitter.
Kevin sent me.
Yeah,
Oh.
so I ended up checking Twitter and or X, I keep calling it Twitter. And I saw all the news from Schefter and Reese, and then that's when I knew it was right. So still really processing this now and still frustrated. And I think you and I were talking earlier about how this is I think just feels different than the Tom situation.
Yeah.
And this is more, I feel like uh, you go through the stages of grieving, but this is more anger and not
And anger
denial.
is a stage of grief.
No, that's what I'm saying. You're going through it, but
Yeah.
with Tom, it was more sadness and I think more shock, just because I think Tom. I don't know how I can't remember how you felt, but I always just thought he was gonna be back because I thought he was gonna cave like he usually does.
I thought the same
And
thing.
I think I thought that's what Bill was thinking at the time too, that he's gonna cave like usual and he'll do whatever he wants. So that's why he was gonna come back. So um I think it was more a state of sadness and shock, and then that ended up kind of turning into a little bit of anger, more so at the people around him instead of him. Because I still think to this day it wasn't fully Tom's um want to leave. I think
I
part of
think
it,
I think he did, but I think
but I think
outside
he was being
influences
pressured by other
factored that
people around
decision
him.
at that time. Whereas looking back, I think he still is happy with his decision,
Hmm.
but if those outside influences weren't impacting him, he might not have.
Yeah. So I
I.e.
think it was.
Giselle, his dad,
Hmm.
Alex.
Yeah. So I think those three people around him I was more angry at than him. And at first I still wanted to see him lose just because I was just angry at just the whole situation. But more so the people around him than himself. And then when I get to see him come back to Gillette, that actually gave a lot more closure because that's when you realize from him, he realized the grass isn't greener on the other side. He basically had some comments basically saying, and what we knew was that what was the case is that the coaching and the effort and the level of detail isn't the same when you get outside of here. And that may be different now. So when I saw the news today, we always knew that the possibility would be, and the
Yep.
longer this dragged out, we thought it was more likely that we every day we would text each other like, "What percentage are you feeling that he's back? What percentage do you feel that he's gone?" And the longer it went out, the more likely we thought it was that he was going to be fired, and especially if we saw an announcement in the morning, it was more likely that he was going to be gone instead of
Yep.
if they were keeping him even more at night. It doesn't really matter to send out something.
Yep.
Um, it doesn't have to be the morning if they keep him because that's kind of business as usual for them. So yeah, I think even as the days going on, I think it's gonna be hard to kind of channel the anger at the right thing right now. I think really frustrated and angry with Bob, um, and just the whole situation in general. Not just Bob, but Jonathan, and then Matt Groh, and I would say even Mac Jones. So you and me we're really big supporters of Mac, and I think just the fact that if he just played better this year, um, we wouldn't be in this situation. We would actually, if we had average quarterback play, we would be probably in the playoffs right now. We would never be having this discussion, and Bill would probably be here for the next 3 years, like we were expecting it to be. So, I think those are really the kind of emotions and things that we were both thinking of, kind of throughout how the day is going on.
Yep. No, I agree with that. And as you were talking about what do we think the percentages are? I know mine was a huge roller coaster starting Saturday. Uh, I think Saturday I was at the store and I texted you, what do you think the percentages are? I think I said 55 to 60%.
Hmm.
And then Sunday morning it was down to 5%. And then Monday after Bill's press conference or whatever it was, media interview,
Hmm.
I said it was 95% he was back. And then as the week has gone on, it's gone down to 50 to 40. And then last night I texted you saying 20.
Hmm.
And even that felt optimistic. So as the week went on, as the season went on, it kind of seemed something more like a realistic possibility. I know during the pod this year, I mentioned the first time I ever thought it ever felt possible that Bill would be fired was after the Saints game, where they get blown out versus the Cowboys. That happens like not as
Hmm.
often in New England, but usually don't see blowouts, but now and then you might. And then
Hmm.
2 weeks in a row. Then as the season went on, they didn't really get blown out. They kept fighting week in and week out. And I thought you see Bill's at least able to connect with the players. He still has them fighting, going all out. Even the Doug Kyed, Andrew Callahan piece said how even people in the organization say every single week Bill says X, Y, and Z is going to happen. And in the game, X, Y, and Z does happen. It's just the players in place aren't able to execute that.
Hmm.
So we thought maybe there'd be a chance that if he was to get some personnel help, especially on the offensive side, he might be able to stick around. But as Kraft alluded to today in his press conference, even though that is something that they discussed, uh, at least what Kraft alluded to, is that if you were to hire a personnel person, it's kind of still tough where Bill had final say for all these years. And then it creates a tough dynamic going forward where, let's say hypothetically, you hire Dave Ziegler to be your GM. If Ziegler gets a player Bill doesn't want, and then the player doesn't play well, then it creates the tough dynamic. Or is Ziegler really going to say no to Bill if Bill is very hard set on going in one direction?
Hmm.
So I get it. As we've alluded to, I don't think it's the right decision to move on. I think Bill has earned that right to try and fix everything, especially with all the success he's had here, how they're going into the offseason with 70 plus million in cap space, likely 85 after they cut JC Jackson. And that's because Bill never mortgaged the future to win now. So they're in a good enough position. There are definitely holes on the team, but they are
Hmm.
in a position to turn things around rather quickly because of Bill still.
Hmm.
But I also think I get wanting to if Kraft stuck with Bill, he'd likely be it would likely be a 3 to 4 year commitment just because you're going to have to bring in a new quarterback. That's not something you can do overnight.
Hmm.
And to turn things around, it's only fair for both sides to get 3 to 4 years from both aspects. If Kraft really thinks Mayo or Vrabel is the right guy going forward, and you've determined that these are who you want as a successor, they're likely not going to be around in 3 to 4 years.
Hmm.
And because of that long commitment, you might miss out on the guy. And Bill's not getting any younger. I know coaching, you don't really see that drop off in coaching, and especially with Bill, we haven't seen any drop off. At
Hmm.
least on the defensive side, you could argue offensive side, but um, it's different with coaches than players because of the salary cap and things like that. But I could see wanting to go in a different direction and also get in a new personnel guy as well. But even though I
Hmm.
don't agree with it, I understand it, but I'm still upset that it went down the way it did, especially with the media circling And that's a whole
Hmm.
nother story, but
Oh yeah, and I think just addressing that quickly before I go back to what you were kind of talking about with Curran looking all smug and happy today that he was right, even though it ended up coming out today he wasn't right, that they didn't make any decision until yesterday, Wednesday, the 10th. So there was no decision made. They weren't going to fire him beforehand. They had talks. And then even Rappaport and
Tom Pelissero.
Tom Pelissero, they were talking about how they had discussions this week about how they could go on together.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like this was set in stone. They had multiple conversations through 3 days, and there was no real main decision till really yesterday. So, and maybe probably it was probably made up on Tuesday night, like after their Tuesday meetings, I bet. But probably Bob didn't really have that conversation with Bill until the next day. So
And even then, too, it's at least the reports were that Bill was only in the office for a little bit on Tuesday. Part of it might have been because he was sick, but
mhm,
it also could have been t Bill was countering Robert's counter of like how
mhm,
best to move forward and how to make things stay. And then on Tuesday, Bill probably said, okay, if I'm to stay, this,
mhm,
I'm comfortable happening.
mhm,
This, I'm not. And then it was probably Wednesday where they discussed, and I'm not comfortable with this and this. And they came
mhm,
to, they say mutual decision. I think it is in part mutual, in part firing.
mhm.
Because I do think there
I
were
think
the report.
that Bill could have done more to for that way it would satisfy Robert to stay probably, and it's something that he
Yep,
probably wasn't comfortable with. So that's why
yep.
I do think that there was a partly, and especially the way that Bill was there today, and I
I
just wasn't expecting that much gratitude and kind of kumbaya moment with him,
Yeah,
where
I
I
wasn't. I was entirely shocked by that. I thought we were gonna. I was expecting Bill to just say, "If you're firing me, f you, I'm out of
hmm
here,"
yeah,
and then maybe years down the line you can be more amicable coming back for Hall of Fame
hmm
ceremony, etc. But I wasn't expecting Bill to be as gracious towards Bob and
hmm
everything.
So that's why it made me think at least partially that they both understood
Yep.
where the other one was coming from. And Bill's not an idiot either, so he kind of knows what's going on and what has to happen. So, and maybe he doesn't want to give up all that control any longer and wants to be the head guy with everything. So,
Yep.
I don't know, we'll see.
And then just going along that for a minute too before we move on is that is something that Tom Pelissero said this morning was that over the past few years, Bill has gotten frustrated with the amount of power that has been taken away and the amount of this might not be the appropriate term, but essentially the amount of meddling that Robert was doing in the football operations, which kind of collaborates what the Kide
hmm
Callahan piece was saying that Robert has been getting more and more of entrenched in the football operations, which I mean, as a fan, you could see both aspects of it where the team isn't going where you need to go. So if you own the team, you might want to be more hands on, but you could also
hmm
say the more Kraft has been hands on,
The worst they've
the worse the
gotten.
organization has been doing. So it's tough to really know the correlation, but I
Yep.
could definitely see Bill over the years saying, I'm not comfortable with this. Granted, the new team he goes to, is he going to be able to get as much control as he had here?
hmm
Probably not, unless you get an owner that just
I think
caves
you
like
could
this.
though if you get an owner that's desperate enough to win, and they haven't
Yeah,
won in a while. So,
yeah.
like the
The only ones
Falcons.
I can really see are the Chargers because the Spanos fam I the Spanos family is also with the Chargers is different because one of their sons is like the head of football operations or
Hmm
something like that, sort of like the Sullivans here back in the
hmm
day. But they did fire their GM, so Bill theoretically could be the GM and coach. And then the Falcons, just because Arthur Blank wants to win. So
hmm
I could, even though they have a GM in place, I could see him firing the GM and let Bill, maybe not being the full player personnel, but bring
hmm
in like a Ziegler where,
Someone that he trusts that
yeah,
he would like to
exactly.
work with. And then even I wouldn't see him going there, but I could see the Panthers giving him the option to do it. I don't think
Yeah,
he would
that
want
too.
to go
I
right for
don't see
Tepper.
him. Yeah, I don't see
Um,
him going to the Panthers because the owner is so
Volatile.
entrenched in in the operations
Hmm
where he's sitting in on the Monday coaches meetings. He's fired two coaches back to back. He forced them
hmm
to draft Bryce Young. He fired the coach after Bryce Young
hmm
had a bad year. And they don't have a first round pick this year and
Hmm.
possibly next year. I don't remember how much they gave up, but I think at least this year they don't have a first round pick. So it's
Hmm.
not a great situation.
Yep.
Like theoretically, it makes sense that they'd be interested in him, but
Yep. And I could also even see in Dallas that working where everyone knows that Jerry Jones is a meddler, but there has been scenarios back in the past where he's kind of stepped aside for not long, but 2 years, 2 or 3 years. I forget which coach that was with, but there has been
Parcells.
history of it happening. There've been Parcells. There was another guy in the 90s too. So not really recent history, but
Yeah. And the thing with the Cowboys, which is intriguing too, is a lot of people on the off, just the thought of it, you would think that wouldn't be a good mix just because Bill is kind of Bill in his own ways, whereas Jerry likes to meddle, like you said. But I forgot which book I read this in. I thought it was Dynasty or Education of a Coach. I tried looking this morning and I
Mhm,
couldn't find it, so I have to go back and I apologize for not citing the appropriate thing. But I remember after Bill left Cleveland, it was either right after he left
mhm,
as head coach of Cleveland or after the Patriots parted ways with him. He was interested in joining the Cowboys, and he actually had a good discussion with Jerry Jones, but they just thought that at this time it wasn't the right fit. But
mhm,
ever since then, he's always had an amicable relationship with Jerry Jones.
mhm,
So I could definitely see Jerry seeing how talented this roster is, how the coaching has been an issue pretty much for a long time with the Cowboys, him bringing
mhm.
in Bill to win a championship. Since Jerry isn't getting any younger either.
Yep. That could be the other aspect too. He wants to get something in before he dies, and
Yeah.
that's kind of morbid to say. But even the same with Arthur Smith is I don't know how old he's
Arthur
pretty
Blank.
old.
Arthur Smith is
Arthur,
a coach that
no,
is a
yeah,
billionaire that was fired.
Arthur, yeah, Arthur Blank.
Arthur
Arthur
Smith might
Blank
be
is
our new offensive coordinator,
I hope
for all
not.
we know.
So, um, going back on kind of what you were saying about, you can kind of see it. I can see more so, and I would like it more so where if they were to hire, we're going to get into the different candidates, but if they were to hire Vrabel, right out of here, and saying that, yeah, he's not the same coach as Bill. He's close. I would say he's a top five coach in the league.
I would too.
Um, and he's even though he hasn't won the last couple of years, that's more so when the players have been given to him. And
And
not
the
really.
just one thing I just want to say on that, which I know a lot of people are saying he was put in a bad situation
Hmm.
to succeed these past few years, and I'm one of those people that say that as well. But we
Hmm.
also don't entirely know the dynamic of how much power Vrabel really had, where all these decisions made without his approval.
Hmm.
S for one, being the Tannehill picking Tannehill over Brady,
Hmm.
trading AJ Brown. How much input did Vrabel really had? He
Yeah, the
might not have
Brown
had
one you
much
could
input,
definitely
or
say he didn't have any input just by the way he reacted to it
yeah,
on
that's
draft
fair.
night.
But again, we don't know. It could have just been frustration as well, just at
Hmm.
the situation of having to get rid of him. But that's just
Hmm.
one thing is we don't know the power dynamic of how much he really had.
Yeah. So I can see getting rid of knowing that he's available and not saying that this decision was made just because Vrabel was there, but just knowing that you could pick between him and Flores or even Mayo. I don't really we'll get into him in a minute, but you have the option of securing your coach for the next 15 years, especially with the one that I see with we'll just get into it right now, the different candidates. So
Yeah,
the ones that we see out there, Mayo, Vrabel, Flores, Josh.
Josh is not gonna. I know.
I don't think he's going to be one, but they're going to
Yeah,
probably interview him just to placate him or something. But they've said that he's a candidate. I don't think he's going to really be a one. I highly doubt that they would risk having him be the coach when he's failed in two other places, even though I don't put the full failure on him in
I do.
Vegas, but
He did the exact same mistakes with the Raiders that he did with Broncos.
he was
So
nicer
at
though.
what?
Said he was nicer.
Yeah. Eh,
But anyway, with Vrabel going to him first, he's my number one option who I'd want.
same here.
And the way that I would see it with him is that you have a top five coach, and that's really hard to get. Like most places, they go coach after coach after coach to find someone, and the Titans stupidly fired him for some like one of the ones that the owner ended up talking with a lot of people, and sometimes you just talk to too many people and you get bad advice.
Yep.
And then she didn't like his speech here at the Hall of Fame induction, and I did actually mention to you during it, it just kind of felt weird his speech
Yeah.
where he's a coach of another team, and it was really gracious to the Patriots. And he even said at the end of it, "You don't want to be listening to me the rest of this. We need to go. We need to go win this game." And it's just the fact that, and I get he is a Patriot because he played here, and it's his day for the Hall of Fame, but it's kind of still weird being a head coach of another team, and the fact that he never addressed that with the ownership or the team there really, I guess, frustrated the owner. And even the rumors that were coming out here, he never tried to address. So
Yeah.
she did not like that, and I guess it rubbed her the wrong way more and more throughout the year. Um, but
And
with it,
the one thing with the Titans ownership too, it's that which I mean I understand like what he said might be a little weird, but
hmm
if you have an entire locker room that loves him,
hmm
will pretty much run through a wall for him, and you see that he hasn't been given the right players to
hmm
succeed with, and then you decide to move on from him. And then the report today was that not on their the two people that are entirely not on their list to go forward with are Belichick and Harbaugh, which
hmm
are the top two candidates, probably the top two coaches available.
hmm
And that's just absolutely asinine, which I think it's they want more power. But to not have to fire one of the top five coaches and not even consider two of the top three coaches in football is
hmm
just idiotic and shows that that franchise is going to be in a lot of trouble going forward.
Yep. So again, I would go with Vrabel just because you know
Yep.
you're getting a top five coach, and then you know that you'd be able to have him locked in basically for the next 15, 20 years because you're
Yep.
not going to be making that same kind of idiotic decision to fire him randomly. And he would just need, again, he hasn't had some great offenses there, but he hasn't had a quarterback. And you just want to make sure you surround him with the right players, you surround him with the right offense coordinator. Um, so he'd be my number one route.
Yep, and I agree with that too. Vrabel is my number one too, which part of the reason is he was coach of the year 2 years ago when he brought that Titans team to be a number one seed in the
mhm,
AFC. 2 years before he beat the number one seed Ravens in the playoffs, who looked pretty much unbeatable the entire year. So he's shown that he can win without really the two those 2 years, they were good. They weren't
mhm,
really great rosters.
yeah.
So it wasn't really teams that should be fighting or contending for a potential Super Bowl like they were
mhm,
those years. So he's shown that he can be a top coach. He is able to motivate players. Like a lot of players this week said that Vrabel is a leader of men.
mhm.
And so you know the type of coach he's going to be. Also, he's coached under different in different regimes as well. Whereas Mayo, for instance, which we'll get into in a minute,
Mhm,
has only played his entire career in New England, has
mhm,
only coached his entire career in New England, which might be good or bad. He's seen the Patriot way from all the way to the early, like
mhm,
middle dynasty days to now. So he's learned from Bill through and through, and he's only had Robert as an owner. Whereas Vrabel, he played in Pittsburgh beforehand, then he came here, then he played in Chiefs. So he's played in different styles, different schemes. He then coached at Ohio State, so he's coached in the college ranks, learned in
mhm,
the college game. I believe that was under Urban Meyer. Then he went to Houston, and even though he coached under Bill O'Brien and, in a sense, Romeo Crennel, who's the defensive coordinator, who are both from the Belichick tree, they do have their own schemes and systems as well. So he's
mhm,
learned essentially from Urban Meyer in the college game, Bill Belichick playing here, and then what's his name? I think Bill Cowher back in Pittsburgh when he was
mhm,
playing. And then in the professional game, he's learned under Bill. He's learned under Bill O'Brien and Romer Cornell. So he's been able to morph his game from different people. Whereas
mhm.
Mayo, we don't know how he's going to be. He's more of an unknown, and it's pretty much everything he's learned is from
Mhm.
Bill.
Yep. And that's like one of the things we'll go into him next. Which is why I wouldn't want him. Is that Mayo is a complete unknown. I get not knowing something doesn't mean you shouldn't go with it, and it might be the better option.
Yeah.
But
Just like for instance, he reminds me a lot of Vrabel when Vrabel
mhm,
became a head coach before, where he was only a defensive coordinator for 1 year in
mhm,
Houston. Wasn't in Houston too long, but he raised the ranks because he was a leader of men,
mhm,
and people gravitated toward him. So he does remind me a lot of
mhm.
Vrabel. But again, at that time when Vrabel was hired there, he was an unknown. Vrabel worked out. You don't necessarily know Mayo's going to work out.
Yep. So, and the thing with Mayo is that he, like you said, he hasn't coached or done anything else outside of the organization, and that's where pretty much everyone that's failed, that have going on to be head coaches elsewhere for the Patriots have not had that experience elsewhere. So you could say the best one that did move on from the Patriots was, and we won't even count Vrabel because I wouldn't count him really as a Belichick coaching tree.
Yeah.
But you would say Bill O'Brien was the best one. But Bill O'Brien had time in the college ranks beforehand, and
Yeah, he was in the college ranks for a lot before he came to New England. He was only in New England
He
for a few
wasn't just a
years.
Bill hire. But you look at Josh, you look at Mangini, you look at these other ones that went out there and that did not have success. They pretty much only had experience here, so they didn't get to see how other teams and programs ran on their operations, and they weren't able to kind of put their own spin on it because they only know one thing. They don't know there are different routes, and that's also why I think Bill's had so much success because he's had so much experience before coming here, and he's even said it about how him and Saban were able to kind of create this new defense that's still used today with the different man coverage and everything like that. But he was able to learn from what he learned in Denver and what he learned from Parcells and what he learned from Navy and pretty much everywhere he went around.
And what Nick learned from his time in the college
Hmm.
ranks before he came
Yeah.
here or
So
came to Cleveland.
I think that experience is really necessary just to shape the coach into who they're going to be.
Yeah, the
Um,
only coach who has depends on who you ask. Some say he had success, some say you didn't. Outside of New England without much other experience is Flores, which I
mhm.
think Flores is a good coach. He had, excuse me, sorry about that. He had success in Miami with non-talented rosters, which the offensive side was a different story, but he only coached in New England and he had some moderate success. But another coach who did have success, at least the first year, this year didn't, who has coached in a lot of different schemes is Brian Daboll,
Mhm.
which he's coached in a lot of different areas outside of New England. And I believe he was coach of the year last year, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken. And the Giants did fall off this year, but they had a lot of injuries and things like that. But
Yep. So we'll get with Mayo, the reason I don't want him, number one, he's unknown. Where you have a known is a Vrabel. So I think if there's maybe a different situation, maybe it'd be different. But just because Vrabel's out there, he's the one I've actually always wanted to target for when Bill leaves. I was
same.
expecting it to be 3 years from now, but um, because Vrabel's out there, I wouldn't go with the unknown. Where you have a known, really, really, really good head coach.
Yep.
Mayo, like
And
you said, he
like you
could be
said,
good.
unknowns aren't necessarily a bad thing. They do work out.
Hmm.
But when you have a known commodity who is essentially a very similar style,
Hmm.
you go with the known commodity.
Hmm.
Like I don't realistically, you would think a best case scenario is Mayo is like Vrabel,
Hmm.
whereas you can get that with Vrabel.
Yeah. So because of that, I would go with the known guy. I wouldn't go with
Yep.
the guess where you're thinking he's going to be like that. But he also could be Brandon Staley. Now, do I think he's going to be Brandon Staley? Probably not, because Staley's a moron, and Mayo at least seems intelligent. But you never know. Like he could
Yep.
lose his mind when he's the head coach and has to make the decisions. So
Look at
you don't
Josh.
know. Yeah, and look at Josh. So you never know. That's why I would go with Vrabel. The other two options, we already kind of talked about Josh. Flores is the other option. I wouldn't
I
mind
don't really.
Flores. I just don't see it happening because one, I think any owner is going to be terrified to interview him. I think just based off of the ongoing lawsuit against the NFL. Because let's say they don't pick him, are they going to be included in that lawsuit going forward? I don't know.
Yeah.
I just want to. It's a murky water, and the fact that he was Bob wasn't really implicated, but Bill was with him, and just his whole tenure here, and kind of Bill being implicated with the text messages, and Bill also being with the Patriots at the time. I just don't see it's kind of messy. I think, even though I think he is a good head coach, I would want some sort of assurance that whoever he picks for offensive coordinator, and maybe this would be from like the GM instead of from him, he'd need to be someone that he could work with because he fired every single offense coordinator he had with
Yep.
Miami, and that's also why their offense didn't do well because they never had consistency there. So they would need some sort of dominant offensive coordinator that wasn't going to leave after 1 or 2 years. So
Yep.
that's the other thing with him. GM, there isn't really much to talk about here. We don't really need to get into the names yet. There are some options out there. Ziegler, Peters, even though it may seem he's in the him and one other candidate are the finalists for the commander's job. So he actually might be going after really shortly.
Yeah, and he
Um,
also interviewed with the Chargers and the
mhm,
Raiders. Part of the the intriguing aspect with Peters was he was in New England from I believe '03 to '08. Then he went to Denver when Josh went to Denver.
Hmm.
So he's been in the building, he's been in the system, and then he's been with the 49ers the last, I think, 7 years or so.
Hmm.
So he's helped contribute to building that really good roster out in San Francisco. So that's
Hmm.
why a lot of people are intrigued with that. But again, I think that by waiting this long, he's probably going to be out of it.
Hmm.
So we'll have to see where they go going forward.
Yep. And that kind of goes into the last topic is where they're going to go forward. So Kraft did mention today they want to move quickly. And I think one will give our predictions. We already said who we did want. We're going to give our predictions of who we think it's going to be.
Yep.
And then kind of what's going to happen. Our coaches and front office guys going to leave with Bill. What's going to happen with players. So I think Mayo is going to get the job based on what kind of everything going out there, and just that it seems like he's groomed for the job by Kraft. I think it's a mistake, and I think it should be Vrabel, but that's what I think is going to happen.
I agree.
Um,
I think the exact same thing. And
mm,
I think that you didn't know that Vrabel was going to be canned up until 2 days ago.
mhm,
And you might have thought he might be open if he's who you identified as being your coach, you can reach out to Tennessee. It seemed like they were having some issues, so they might
mhm,
be willing to part ways with him. Whether you had to give up draft capital or not's another
mhm,
story. But that is something he might have been someone that they were targeting, but you didn't know he was going to be
mhm,
available. Whereas if you're coming into Monday after the season with a decision, pretty much you're likely leaning towards firing Bill. You
mhm.
have to have some people in mind of who you're going to be going forward with, and
Yeah,
you knew Mayo was going to be available.
yeah,
So that's why I think it's going to be Mayo. And I agree. I think it should be Vrabel. I think it's going to be Mayo. Whether and I guess we can go into the next aspect is what happens with the coaches going forward, if depending on who they go with. If you bring in, let's say hypothetically they do go with our guy Vrabel,
mhm,
is Bill O'Brien going to be the offensive coordinator? Because it seemed like Bill O'Brien was Kraft's pick at being
mhm,
offensive coordinator, but Vrabel coached under Bill O'Brien in Houston, so it's going to create interesting power dynamic. Is that something Vrabel's going to be comfortable with? And is that something Bill O'Brien's going to be comfortable with?
mhm,
Um, or even if it is Mayo, Mayo probably won't have a decision if Kraft wants Bill O'Brien. It's going to be Bill O'Brien,
mhm.
but is Kraft going to give the coach power to pick his whole coaching staff?
Mhm. Yeah, so that'll be the interesting part and see who Bill is going to want to poach with him. Obviously, his sons are probably going to go with him. That would be
Yeah,
really weird if they don't. Well, not if they don't. They may go somewhere else. I doubt it. They'll probably go with him. But I would say a 0% chance they stay here.
yeah, zero.
Because that would be so awkward. And you like to think there are some really good coaches that are on the staff more so on the defensive side than the offensive side. So Pellegrino, the cornerbacks coach. I could definitely see Bill trying to take him because he's kind of groomed all these cornerbacks that they've had. And again, how hard are the Patriots going to fight to keep him from leaving? Whereas they haven't fought before. And that's why it's kind of gotten to this way with the massive brain drain that they've had. And then even Demarcus Covington, they may try and promote him to defensive coordinator because he's a
That's my
really
guess. I think
rising star.
yeah.
But maybe Bill has him be, well, he probably won't if Steve's going with him, but
Yeah.
um, who
That's
knows?
why I think Covington stays just
Hmm.
because I think he's going to be Mayo's defensive coordinator, whereas wherever Bill goes, Steve's going to get the official
Hmm.
title, in my
Yeah.
opinion. And I think Steve has earned it, to be honest. He's
Hmm.
been calling the defense the last 4 or 5 years. If he wasn't Bill's son, he would have gotten the title a few years ago.
Yeah.
But I think part of the potential nepotism claim is why
Hmm.
he never actually did it, along with Mayo being a good coach too.
Hmm.
But I think Covington probably stays, or yeah, Covington probably stays. Pellegrino's an interesting one where he might stay or he might
Hmm.
go.
Yep.
I hope Troy Brown
I really don't
is
know about him.
gone.
Yeah, I hope he's
What?
gone, but I also don't want to wish him upon Bill.
Yeah,
So,
I can see Joe Judge leaving,
mhm.
going with Bill. I think Cam McCord's probably gone, and I don't think he goes with Bill
No, I
either.
don't think it is. That'd be the easy way for Bill to get rid of him without firing him
Firing.
because Bill doesn't fire anyone. So, he'll let someone else fire him.
Yep.
And then players, it's really hard to talk about like what players are going to go there, but free agency, just the current free agents, I could definitely see actually Duggar going there because
Yeah.
number one, I wouldn't re-sign him to a big money, but Bill may want to sign him for more money than he's worth just to establish culture there.
And the thing with Falcons have a really good safety in Bates.
Mhm,
And I think I could see Bill getting Duggar so we can have that essentially Duggar Peppers combination in
mhm,
Atlanta. But also, I think the player aspect that you're bringing up is a very intriguing point where wherever Bill goes, he's going to need to establish the culture. And
mhm,
it's tough to do that if you don't get buy-in. So the easiest way to have buy-in is having players who have played under Bill
mhm,
before and played in this culture to help establish that. And the two, like we were saying earlier, it seems like the two most logical places are either Atlanta or Dallas. Atlanta's only players on the roster, at least as of now, who have played under Bill are Jonnu Smith, who is a disaster here, but
mhm,
did play here for 2 years, and then Cordarrelle Patterson, who I believe played here only 1 year and did have some moderate success, but it wasn't here extensively. And in Dallas, the only player who's played under Bill is Stephon Gilmore.
mhm,
So it's wherever he goes, he's not going somewhere where there's a lot of people who have played in this culture and have it established. So I can definitely see him bringing in several key Patriot players, either free agency or trade. With, like you said, I think Duggar's a big one. If he goes, I could see him wanting to bring in a Wenyu. I just don't see the Patriots letting a Wenyu go just because
mhm,
they have the deficiencies on the offensive line. But I could see someone like Mac Wilson, uh, Jalen Mills, Anthony Jennings, who are all players you'd probably want to keep if you're the Patriots. Mills
mhm.
is probably most expendable, but Jennings and Wilson, how they really stepped on this year, I could see Bill wanting them, especially
Mhm.
Jennings.
Yep.
Um,
And then even Kendrick Bourne, his
yep,
Instagram post today, basically saying, "Wherever you go, let me know. I want to go there." So,
yeah,
and he seems like one of those guys that he was really appreciative of being molded by Bill, into a better player and a better professional. And there's a lot of players out there that have said stories like that. So there's definitely other ones that have probably played for Bill that are going to be free agents, but aren't really with this team right now that are coming
yep.
from other locations too. So, it'll be interesting to see who else goes there, and
And
who is
Bourne is
able to
an
bring in.
interesting one too, because I think most people just assume the Patriots would try to re-sign him just
Hmm.
because of our deficiencies at wide receiver. But if he goes where Bill goes, that's another key wide receiver you're going to go with. We're going into this offseason, our thought, this is for another episode,
Hmm.
but we've kind of been alluding to you draft a wide receiver, you sign a wide receiver, and you go into the year with the two new guys as your 1 and 2 wide receiver, Kendrick Bourne as your 3, Pop Douglas as your 4,
Hmm.
and your wide receiver group's a lot better. Whereas if you miss out on Bourne, who, even though he didn't play the second half of the year, was still your
Hmm.
most productive receiver this year, that's a huge loss.
Yep.
And
No, agreed.
it's not a huge. There are good wide receivers available, but they're going to be expensive, and some of them are aging. You're not going to be able to get multiple good wide receivers most likely on the free agent side.
Yep, 100%.
And then just one interesting, I just wanted to, before we kind of wrap up,
Hmm.
is one interesting player that I could see traded, which might kind of seem like out of nowhere or a shock, would be David Andrews if Bill goes to Atlanta.
Hmm.
David Andrews is from Georgia. David Andrews' uncle was Dan Reeves, who was a coach of the Falcons and has been a captain under Bill for years. If Bill really wanted to establish culture, I could see Andrews just not even playing, deciding to retire if he doesn't want to play for Bill
Hmm.
anymore. But I could also see Bill trading for Andrews and Andrews willing to play for another organization if it's still for Bill, with it being in Georgia. Whereas if Bill goes to the Cowboys, I don't see that as likely. But since it is home, I could see Bill definitely trying to trade for Andrews. Whether the Patriots allow that or not is another story. But
Yep. No, I could definitely see that happening too. And Andrews has been one of those guys that have been constantly vocal about how they've let Bill down this year and they've been playing for Bill and Bill's taught them everything. I could definitely see him saying, "I'm playing for Bill, I'm not playing at all." So I could definitely see that being the case as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. We'll definitely have some more podcasts coming out to kind of discuss this. We may try and see if we can get this kind of group discussion going maybe next week or the week after. Just get everyone else's thoughts around kind of the league about what's going on. So thank you everyone for listening. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Pat Sterling Level Pod, and then subscribe, rate, and review on our podcasting forums and on YouTube as well. Thank you very much, guys, and talk to you guys next episode.